So, historically, Earth has hovered around 8 cycles per second, 7.8, just under 8 cycles per second. We are moving quickly now beyond that. Researchers now suspect that we're moving to the next element in this series that governs the heartbeat of the Earth, the lucky number 13, 13 cycles per second, right here. Now this is important. This is important to you. Here's the reason why. What I have just done is I've given you now 2 digitally measurable parameters of the Earth. These are the parameters now that dictate much of our experience in terms of cellular, genetic, and emotional response to what we call life. They are governed by this series of numbers. Now what we're seeing happening is this. With just this information now, you have enough information for yourself that you are able to develop a context within which all of the other things that we will do in these next few hours, all of the events of your life are unfolding within the context of these parameters. And let me show you why this is important to you. What we're seeing is this. The magnetics are falling quickly, apparently moving toward a time of 0-point magnetics. No magnetics on Earth. Frequency is increasing quickly, apparently moving toward or possibly reaching a threshold fundamental resonance of 13 cycles per second, 13 hertz. The day that that happens, the day that these 2 parameters become very, very close, possibly meeting, that point, that innocent-looking little point right there, that's the day that every belief system that I'm aware of, that I've ever studied, every religion, all of the sacred orders and the mystery schools and the sacred sects, the sect of the Rosicrucians, the sect of the Red Hand, the Amethystine orders, the Emerald orders, the Order of the Holy Grail, the Melchizedek orders, the Essene traditions, the Egyptian mystery schools, the Peruvian mystery schools. They are all, the Christian traditions, they are all based upon the ideas and the concepts of what you and I must do in our lives to prepare our bodies and our emotions to gracefully allow us to transition through this day in human history that the ancients called the shift of the ages. And I'll call it the shift from this point forward. That's what this point is all about. Some people call this the New Age. From this point forward, that is the time that they will reference as the New Age. Some people call this the Christing process, the Christing of Earth. There's so many terms out there that were meaningless, I thought I would just add one more to it and call it 0 point. 0 point experience. From the Hopi tradition, the Hopis say that we have lived in 5 previous worlds, this being the 5th that we're in right now, and that in each of these worlds there has come a time when our mind and our heart has become so separate, the connection, the relationship between our minds and our hearts have become so dissonant that there was no way to find the healing, and Earth goes through a time of purification to allow that healing process again. So from the Hopi perspective, we are now approaching the time of the 6th world of the Hopi. Other indigenous people say that we've lived in a dream for thousands of years, and that when we go to sleep at night, we live a dream within a dream, and that on this day, our dream changes. It's a new dream from that point forward. This point provides the context within which all the rest of the information will unfold as we go through these next few hours, this 0 point. Now, let's summarize what we've just done here, because we covered a lot of information in just a few seconds, a few moments of time. What we see is this. This is our Earth, a schematic, a cross-section schematic of the Earth. And the Earth rotates about an iron core. As Earth rotates, and remember, it's not only the Earth as we see it externally, it's all of the inner cores are rotating at the same time. As the Earth rotates around these cores, it generates magnetic fields. Okay? The faster the Earth rotates, the denser, the stronger the fields. The slower it rotates, the weaker the fields. Well, Earth is in the process right now. Our rotation is slowing down. Earth is slowing down. And as it does so, these fields become weaker and weaker until the point that the fields collapse to zero. Okay? Now, I have to tell you, as a geologist, an ex-geologist, this, to me, is an outrageous thing for me to say to you. When I first began to understand this, I said, there is no way. And this little voice in my head would say, way, and I'd say, no way, and it would say, way, because it has happened before. And now, as we're able to go back into the history, the written text and the non-written text, the geologic texts of our world, we see very clear evidence that this, in fact, has happened. That Earth, every once in a while, slows a rotation to a point where there is a rest period. There is no rotation. And it rests for a brief period of time and begins to increase the rotation again. And as it does so, it rotates in the opposite direction. And again, as a geologist, when I first began to understand that, I said, that's just outrageous. And the more I researched, the more I read, the more I went back and looked at the ancient texts, we see that it, in fact, has happened at least once that we're able to record, we're able to discern in recorded history. When I was in school, I was taught that if Earth ever stopped rotating, there would be no gravity. And I get that question all the time. People say, well, what about gravity? If there's no rotation, does that mean everything flies off the planet? And I remember there were textbooks when I was in school that showed just that. They said if ever Earth would stop rotating, everybody would fly off. And they had these pictures of people that were that were like this. Everybody was having a bad hair day, the day that the Earth stops rotating. And we now know that that is simply not the case. That Earth's gravity is not a function of the rotation. Without rotation at all, Earth still has gravity. When we send astronauts into space, and they are weightless in space, and we propel their craft in a rotational fashion so that they are able to stay on the sides of their capsule, that's not really gravity. What that is a centrifugal force that is throwing everything out to the sides of the craft so that they are able to simulate gravity. That is not true gravity. So what I'm saying to you is that whether Earth rotates or not is irrelevant in terms of the gravity of the Earth. We have records. If this were to happen in recorded human history, I would certainly expect that it would have been, someone would have noticed it and we would see it in our texts. And in fact, we do. We have at least one time, about 3,500 years ago, there's that number again. Now think about this. If Earth were ever to stop rotating on its axis, come to a rest, some portion of the Earth toward the sun would become very warm, and another portion would probably be very cool during the time that the rotation stopped. And that's precisely what we see in these texts. We see recorded in the Peruvian texts the long night that lasted almost 3 days, and at the same time, on the other side of the Earth, right here in the Middle East, what we see are biblical records of a long day that was over 20 hours long. The Hopi record a day where the sun rose twice in the same day. Now think about that. They call it the long day, where the sun rose once in the east and rose once in the west and set in the east, and later that day, the long day, 20 hours later, rose again in the east and set in the west, as it continues to do today. So it may be that we have very good records, if we have the wisdom to recognize them, of exactly this process happening at least once at some point in recorded Earth history. This time that we're talking about, the shift of the ages, you now have the parameters that are defining what this time means to us now. You and I probably are living the days, the precursive days, toward an event very similar to something like this. And the reality is that those inner cores will probably stop rotating long before the outer cores do, and you and I may not recognize this rotational shift quite the same way that we would expect to in and day out in the normal sequence of our lives. And you'll understand, and I will explain that much better as we go through this information.